The blue cookie tin is sitting on the passenger seat of a car that doesn't belong to me, and I don't know yet where we're driving. The woman at the wheel keeps glancing over at it, like she's afraid it's going to open on its own. I told her not to worry. I told her the lid has been stuck since 1987, when Harold tried to pry it off with a butter knife and bent the rim. You have to press down on the left side and twist. Nobody knows that but me. Nobody living, anyway. I suppose I should start somewhere that makes sense, but my mind doesn't move in straight lines anymore, and maybe it never did. I'm 74 years old, and I spent 41 of those years shelving books for children in a school that doesn't exist anymore. And if there's one thing a librarian learns, it's that stories get told the way they want to be told, not the way you plan them. So, let me try. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I was born in Moore, Oklahoma, and until the afternoon of April 12th, I had lived in the same house for 52 years. I want to say that again because the number still doesn't feel real when I say it out loud. 52 years. Harold and I bought that house in 1973 for $19,000, which was every cent we had, and $1,100 more we borrowed from his brother Clyde, who never let us forget it until the day he died. It was a little yellow ranch on Janeway Avenue with a chain-link fence and a sycamore out front that dropped those awful spiky seed balls every September. I hated that tree. Harold loved it. When he passed in 2019, I couldn't bring myself to cut it down, and now I'm glad I didn't, because the tree is still standing and the house is not. I want to tell you about the tin before I tell you about the storm, because the tin is the reason any of this matters. In 1973, when we moved in, Harold's mother gave us a box of butter cookies. The Royal Dansk ones, the Danish kind in the blue tin with the little picture of the farmhouse on the lid. We ate the cookies in about a week because Harold had no self-control around anything sweet, and when the tin was empty, I was going to throw it out. But Harold said no, leave it on the counter, I have an idea. And that night, when I came home from my shift at the elementary school, there was a little folded piece of notebook paper inside the tin. It said, "Ellie, I forgot to tell you this morning that you looked pretty in the green sweater. I'm telling you now." H. That was the first one. He started leaving them in there every few days, sometimes every day. Sometimes a whole week would go by, and I'd think he'd stopped, and then I'd open the tin and find 3 at once. They weren't love letters, not exactly. They were smaller than that. "Ellie, the coffee this morning was too strong, and I drank it anyway because you made it." "Ellie, I saw a red-tailed hawk on the power line outside Carson's feed. Thought of you." "Ellie, I'm sorry about what I said about your sister. You were right, and I was wrong, and I'll tell her so on Sunday. Little things. Nothing that would mean anything to anybody else. I kept every single one. 52 years of them. I counted once, about 10 years ago, and I got to somewhere around 2,300 before I gave up and stopped. After Harold passed, I found 17 more that he'd hidden in there in the months before. Little goodbyes, I guess, though he never came out and said it that way. He wasn't that kind of man. The last one, the one on top when I found them after the funeral, just said, "Ellie, don't forget to turn the porch light off." H. I haven't turned it off since. Not once. The tin stayed on the kitchen counter next to the sugar jar for all 52 years. Even when my son Daniel came home from college and told me it was tacky and I should put it in a drawer. Even when the grandkids were little and I had to explain it to them 9 or 10 times before they understood, the tin stayed on the counter. It was the first thing I saw every morning and the last thing I saw every night. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being a tin full of notes and became something closer to a heart. Not Harold's heart exactly. Ours. The one we built together out of 52 years of ordinary mornings. I'm telling you this so you understand what was at stake. The house, yes, but the tin first. The tin most of all. The weather service started putting out bulletins on the morning of the 10th. I knew the drill. Anybody who's lived in Moore for more than a year knows the drill. You pay attention, but you don't panic, because we've been panicking about weather down here since before I was born, and most of the time, it slides past us and hits Norman or Shawnee or somewhere east. Tornado Alley doesn't mean a tornado every day. It means a tornado could happen any day, which is a different thing entirely, and you learn to live with the possibility the way people in California learn to live with earthquakes. It doesn't go away. It just becomes the wallpaper of your mind. By the evening of the 11th, the wallpaper was starting to peel. My neighbor Sandra, she lives 2 houses down, and she's been my friend since Harold and I moved in, called me around 9 p.m. and said Bill had the radio on and they were saying this one was going to be bad. Not maybe, not possibly, was. I told her I'd keep an eye on things. I said I had a weather radio and my cell phone, and I knew where the crawl space was. I want to stop here for a minute because I've been thinking about something, and I don't know if any of you have ever thought about it too, but I'd like to know. When you've lived in one place long enough, there's a way the house starts to know you back. I'm not talking about anything spiritual. I'm talking about the practical thing. The way you know which floorboard creaks, and the house knows which side of the bed you sleep on because it's lower on that side now, and you know the hot water heater needs a minute before the shower gets right. And the house knows that if you leave a cabinet door open too long, the cat will climb in. It's a conversation. And after 52 years, the conversation gets so quiet, you stop hearing it. You just live inside it. I didn't know that was what I had until I didn't have it anymore. So if you've ever felt that, even a little, and you want to tell me what house it was, or what room, or what sound, I'm listening. I mean it. Write it down somewhere. Tell somebody. Don't let that kind of knowing disappear without a witness. All right, I'll go on. The morning of the 12th was strange. The sky wasn't green yet, but it had that quality that anybody from here recognizes. A kind of thick yellow stillness, like the air itself had gotten heavy and forgot how to move. The birds were gone. That's the part the weather radio can't tell you. The birds know before the instruments do. And when you wake up and the sycamore is empty and silent, you know something is coming, even if you can't say what. I made my coffee. I opened the tin and took out the last note Harold had left me and read it, which I do on mornings when I'm afraid. Don't forget to turn the porch light off. I read it 3 times. I put it back. Around 11, Daniel called. I have to tell you about Daniel before I tell you what he said, because otherwise it won't make sense. Daniel is my son. He's 51. He lives in Tulsa, which is about an hour and a half away, and he runs a small heating and cooling business that he took over from his father-in-law. Daniel and I have a complicated relationship. I won't pretend otherwise. After Harold died, Daniel wanted me to sell the house and move to an assisted living place near him in Tulsa. I said no. He asked again the next year. I said no again. He asked every time he called, for 4 years, and every time I said no. And every time there was a little more distance between us. He wasn't wrong to worry. I wasn't wrong to stay. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and they were, and we just had to live inside the contradiction. When he called on the morning of the 12th, he said, "Mom, they're saying it might come straight through more. You need to get in the car and drive north." I told him I had a crawl space. He said the crawl space wasn't enough if it was an EF4 or worse. I told him I'd lived through the 1999 tornado and the 2013 tornado and I'd be fine. He said, "Mom, please. And I want you to know, I really want you to know this, because it matters to what happened after." I almost said yes. I had my keys in my hand. I was looking at the tin on the counter, and I was thinking about how I'd have to carry it out to the car, and how I'd feel silly sitting in a Motel 6 in Enid holding a cookie tin on my lap like a child. And I said, "Daniel, I'll be fine. I'll call you when it passes." And I hung up. I have thought about that phone call more times than I can count. I have thought about the version of my life where I said yes. I don't know if that version is better or worse. I only know it's not the one I got. The sirens started at 2:47 p.m. I know the time exactly because I looked at the clock on the microwave, and something about those numbers has stayed in my head. 2:47, the colon blinking, the sirens rising. I grabbed the tin. That's all I grabbed. Not my purse, not my phone charger, not the photo album from the hall closet or the ring Harold gave me on our 40th anniversary, or the quilt my grandmother made in 1952. Just the tin. I went down into the crawl space with the tin pressed against my chest, and I sat on an overturned plastic bucket, and I said the Our Father 3 times because my mother taught me that, and it still helps. And then I just listened. You know how people describe a tornado? They say it sounds like a freight train. That's true, and it's also not true. It sounds like a freight train if the freight train were made of air and was trying to get inside your house by any means necessary. It sounds like the world taking a long, greedy breath and not giving it back. The pressure drops, your ears pop. There's a kind of vacuum that opens up around you, and you feel your body becoming a thing inside a larger thing that doesn't care whether you live or die. And for one long second that probably lasted 15 seconds but felt like a year, I understood in a way I had never understood before that I was very small. And then the house came apart. I want to tell you what that sounds like, but I don't know if I can. It's not one sound. It's every sound. It's the nails in the studs letting go. It's the glass in the windows turning into a kind of music. It's the sycamore outside taking a piece of the roof with it as it fell. It's the refrigerator moving across the kitchen floor and hitting the wall. It's 52 years of a house deciding all at once that it's done being a house. I had my eyes closed. I had the tin pressed so hard against my chest that I had a bruise across my sternum for 2 weeks afterward in the exact rectangular shape of the lid. I was not crying. I was not praying anymore. I was just waiting. And then it was quiet. I've told this part to a few people now, and I don't think any of them understood what I meant when I said it was quiet. It wasn't quiet like a library. It wasn't quiet like a church. It was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Because a minute before, the whole world had been screaming, and now there was nothing, and your brain doesn't know what to do with that. It's like listening for a song that just stopped. You keep waiting for it to come back. I opened my eyes. I couldn't see much because there was dust everywhere and the crawl space was half collapsed, but I could see sky where the kitchen floor used to be. I could see sky, and I was sitting in a crawl space, and that meant the kitchen was gone. I didn't understand that at first. My mind kept trying to put the kitchen back. That's a strange thing about shock. Your brain edits the world to make it make sense, and for about 2 minutes I sincerely believed that the kitchen was still there, and I just couldn't see it through the dust. Then I stood up and hit my head on a beam and started bleeding, and that woke me up. I crawled out. I don't remember exactly how. There was a space where a piece of the wall had fallen at an angle and made a kind of lean-to, and I squeezed through it, still holding the tin. When I got out, I was standing in what had been my kitchen, except there was no kitchen. There was a concrete slab with some pipes sticking up out of it. There was my refrigerator on its side about 40 feet away in what used to be Sandra's front yard. There was a sneaker that wasn't mine sitting on top of what used to be my stove. My bedroom was gone. My living room was gone. The hallway where I had measured Daniel's height on the doorframe every year until he was 17, gone. The sycamore was still standing. The house was not. I sat down on the slab. I put the tin next to me. I looked at my hands and they were shaking, and I thought I should be crying, but I wasn't. I was just watching my hands shake like they belonged to somebody else. I want to tell you what I thought about, sitting there, because I think it matters. I didn't think about Harold. I didn't think about Daniel. I didn't think about all the things I had lost. What I thought about, and I don't know why, and I've never been able to explain it, was a specific afternoon in 1978 when I was pregnant with Daniel, and Harold came home from work early with a pint of strawberry ice cream because I had mentioned it that morning, and we sat on the back porch eating it out of the carton with 2 spoons and watching a thunderstorm come in from the west. That's what my brain gave me, of all the things. A pint of strawberry ice cream, 47 years ago, and the sound of Harold laughing at something I said that I can't remember. That's when I started to cry. Sandra found me. Her house was damaged, but still standing. The tornado had done that thing tornadoes do, where it hopped, where it took one house and left the next one mostly alone. She came running across what used to be our 2 front yards, and she was shouting my name, and when she got to me, she dropped to her knees on the slab and put her arms around me, and she said, "Eleanor, oh my God, Eleanor." And I said, "Sandra, the house is gone." And she said, "I know, honey, I know." And I said, "But the tin is okay." And she looked at the tin on the slab next to me, and she started crying too, and that's how Bill found us when he came around the corner a minute later. The 2 of us on a concrete slab in the middle of the wreckage, holding each other and crying over a cookie tin. The paramedics came. My head was cut, but not badly. They wanted to take me to the hospital. I said I'd go, but only if I could bring the tin. And the young man, he couldn't have been more than 25, with a kind face and a tattoo on his forearm of what looked like a compass rose. He said, "Ma'am, you can bring whatever you want." And he helped me into the back of the ambulance, and Sandra said she'd meet me there. And as we drove away, I looked back and I saw the slab, and the sycamore, and the sneaker on top of the stove, and I said goodbye to my house in my head. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't have the voice for it yet. At the hospital, they put 4 stitches in my scalp, and they gave me a blanket that smelled like industrial laundry soap, and they put me in a hallway because all the rooms were full. The whole east side of Moore had come in at once, and there were people in worse shape than me everywhere I looked. I sat on a gurney in that hallway with the tin on my lap, and I watched nurses running past me, and I watched a man across the hall holding his wife's hand while she slept, and I watched a woman about my age crying into a paper cup, and I understood that I was one of the lucky ones. That's a strange kind of understanding to come to. I was lucky. My house was gone, and I was lucky. Both of those things were true. And that's when the man sat down next to me. I didn't notice him at first. He just appeared, the way people do in hospitals, without introduction, without the usual social choreography. He was older than me by a few years, maybe 80. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans and work boots, and he had white hair that needed cutting, and his hands were the kind of hands that had spent a lifetime holding tools. He had a bandage on his forehead. He sat down on the gurney next to mine, and he didn't say anything for a long time. We just sat there together in the hallway, 2 old strangers, listening to the hospital move around us. After a while, he looked at the tin on my lap, and he said, "Royal Dansk. My wife used to keep her sewing needles in one of those." I said, "Mine has letters in it." He said, "Letters from who?" I said, "From my husband. He passed in 2019. He nodded like that was an ordinary thing to say. He didn't try to comfort me. He didn't say, "I'm so sorry," or "he's in a better place," or any of the things people say when they're uncomfortable. He just nodded. And then he said, "Mine passed in 2021. Her name was Margaret." I said, "Harold." He said, "Pleased to meet you, Harold's wife." I said, "Eleanor." He said, "Walter." And we sat there for a while longer. I want to tell you that something dramatic happened in that hallway, but it didn't. We just sat. He asked me if I'd lost the house, and I said yes. He asked me if I had family, and I said a son in Tulsa. He asked me if anyone had called him, and I said I didn't have my phone. It was probably in a field somewhere in Arkansas by now. He took out his phone, which was an old flip phone, and he said, "What's his number?" And I told him. And he called Daniel for me, and I listened to him say, "Your mother is at Norman Regional. She's all right. She has a few stitches. She needs a ride." He didn't say who he was. He just said it and hung up. I said, "Thank you." He said, "I lost mine too." I said, "Your wife?" He said, "No, I lost her 4 years ago. I lost the house. Same storm. Different street." And I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, and I saw that under the flannel shirt and the work boots and the unkempt hair, he was a man who had just lost everything too. And he was sitting in a hospital hallway, alone, making phone calls for strangers. I said, "Do you have family?" He said, "I have a daughter in Seattle. She's on a plane right now." I said, "Is there anyone here?" He said no. We sat together until Daniel got there. It was about 4 hours. We didn't talk the whole time. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat. He told me about Margaret. She had been a school teacher, she had died of pancreatic cancer, she had liked murder mysteries, and carried a coin her father had given her in 1952 in her pocket every day of her life. I told him about Harold. The notes, the tin, the sycamore, the way he used to hum when he was thinking. Neither of us cried. I think we had both used up our crying for the day. Before Daniel arrived, Walter did something strange. He reached into the inside pocket of his flannel shirt and he took out a small leather wallet. Not a regular wallet, a business card holder, the kind people used to carry, and he took out a card and handed it to me. He said, "If you need anything at all, you call me." I took the card. I didn't look at it. I just put it in the pocket of the hospital gown they'd given me, and I said, "Thank you, Walter." And he stood up slowly, the way men his age stand up, and he touched my shoulder, and he walked away down the hallway. I never saw him walk out. I was looking at the tin in my lap. Daniel arrived an hour later. He had driven 90 miles per hour from Tulsa. He hugged me, and he cried, and he said, "Mom, Mom, Mom," and he didn't say "I told you so," which was the kindest thing he could have done, and which I will remember for the rest of my life. He drove me back to his house in Tulsa that night. I sat in the passenger seat with the tin on my lap, and I watched the dark countryside go by, and I thought about Walter, and I thought about Harold, and I thought about Margaret, whom I had never met and would never meet, and I thought about the coin her father gave her in 1952. It wasn't until the next morning, sitting in Daniel's guest room with the sun coming up over an unfamiliar street, that I took the card out of the pocket of the hospital gown I had slept in because I didn't have any other clothes. The card said, "Walter Ashford, Ashford Construction and Holdings, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma," and a phone number. I turned the card over. On the back, in a neat old man handwriting and blue ballpoint pen, he had written, "Eleanor, when you are ready, I would like to rebuild your house. No charge. I can't explain why, and I hope you will not ask. Walter." I sat on the edge of the bed, and I read the card 6 times. I looked at the tin. I looked at the card again. I had never heard of Ashford Construction. I had never heard of Walter Ashford. He was a stranger in a flannel shirt in a hospital hallway. I got up. I went into Daniel's kitchen, which was full of stainless steel and granite countertops, and the smell of coffee and the low hum of his life that I was now part of in a way I didn't want to be. Daniel was at the table drinking coffee and reading something on his phone, and when I sat down, he looked up and he said, "Mom, we need to talk about what happens next." I said, "Daniel, who is Walter Ashford?" He looked at me like I had asked him who George Washington was. He said, "Mom, Walter Ashford. Ashford Construction. He built half of Oklahoma City. He's been on the news 100 times. Why?" I handed him the card. Daniel read it. He read it again. He looked at the back. He looked at the front. He looked up at me, and his face did a thing I had never seen it do before. It went through about 4 emotions in 2 seconds and landed somewhere between astonishment and suspicion. He said, "Mom, where did you get this?" I told him. I told him the whole thing. The hallway. The flip phone. Margaret. The coin. Daniel sat there for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, this man is a billionaire. Actually a billionaire. He's in the papers. He has foundations. He builds skyscrapers. Why would he?" And then he stopped. Because he saw, the same moment I saw, that the question didn't matter. The card said he couldn't explain why, and he hoped I wouldn't ask. Whatever the reason was, Walter had already decided it was his to keep. I'll tell you what I did next, and I'll tell you what I thought about while I did it, and I'll tell you what I decided, because that's the part of the story I've been coming to this whole time. I went back to Daniel's guest room. I sat on the bed. I put the tin on the nightstand and the card next to it, and I looked at them both for a long time. And I thought about Harold. I thought about what Harold would have said. Harold was a proud man. He would not have wanted charity. He would have been suspicious. He would have asked all the questions Daniel was asking out loud in the kitchen. Why us? What does he want? What's the catch? Harold's whole life was built on not owing anybody anything, including his brother Clyde, even though he did. But I also thought about something else. I thought about Walter's face when he said, "I lost mine too." I thought about the way he sat in that hallway alone, 80 years old, making phone calls for strangers because his daughter was on a plane and there was nobody there. I thought about Margaret's coin. I thought about all the things we carry in our pockets that nobody else knows the weight of, and I thought, and this is the part I want you to hear, I thought, he's not trying to save me. He's trying to save himself. I don't know if I was right. I have never asked him. But sitting on that bed in my son's guest room, with the tin full of Harold's notes on one side of me and a stranger's business card on the other, I made a decision. I decided that I was going to let him. Not because I needed him to, not because I deserved it, but because refusing him would be its own kind of cruelty, the cruelty of denying someone the one thing they can offer when the world has taken everything else. I called him that afternoon. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Walter, it's Eleanor." He said, "Eleanor, I'm glad you called." I said, "I've thought about your offer." He said, "And?" I said, "I accept. On one condition." He said, "Name it." I said, "I want to pay you back. Not all of it. I can't. But something. I have a little money saved. I can pay something. And if I can't pay you in money, I'll pay you in something else. I don't know what. But I don't want it to be a gift. I want it to be a transaction, Walter. Do you understand?" He was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he said, "Eleanor, may I tell you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My wife Margaret lost her childhood home in a tornado. It was 1952. Her father rebuilt it with his own hands because they had no insurance. It took him 3 years. She told me that story on our first date, and she told me that story on the last day she was conscious in the hospital. It was the story she told about who she was. And I have a lot of money, Eleanor. I have more money than any human being should have. And there is exactly one thing I wanted to do with it before I died, and that was to do for someone else what Margaret's father did for her. I have been waiting for the right storm for 20 years. Do you understand?" I was crying. I said, "Yes." He said, "So here is what I will do. I will rebuild your house, and you will not pay me. But you will do something else. You will let me come over for coffee when it's done. You will let an old widower sit in your kitchen and drink bad coffee and talk about his wife. That is my price. Is it acceptable?" I said, "Yes, Walter, it is acceptable." He said, "Good. I'll have someone call you tomorrow." I hung up. I sat on Daniel's guest bed and I cried for about an hour, quietly, so Daniel wouldn't hear. And then I got up and I washed my face and I went downstairs and I told Daniel, and Daniel didn't know what to say. He said, "Mom." He said it several times, "Mom, Mom." And finally he said, "I don't understand what's happening." I said, "Me neither, sweetheart. But I think it's all right." And that's where I'll stop for now, because the rest of it is the rebuilding, and the rebuilding took 14 months, and there's a lot I could tell you about it, but most of it is ordinary. The permits, the foundation, the arguments about whether to put the kitchen in the same spot or move it to catch the morning light. Walter came by every few weeks. He wore the same flannel shirt every time, or maybe he had 5 of them. I never asked. He sat on folding chairs with me in what would become the living room, and we drank coffee out of paper cups, and we talked about Margaret and Harold and nothing in particular. I asked him once why he'd picked me. He said, "I didn't. You picked yourself. You were the one with the tin." That's all he ever said about it. The house is on Janeway Avenue, in the same spot, with the same sycamore out front. It looks almost exactly like the old house, because Walter's architect was kind enough to work from photographs Sandra had on her phone. There are small differences. The kitchen window is a little bigger. There's a built-in shelf in the hallway where I keep the tin now, at eye level, where I see it every time I walk past. The porch light still stays on at night. I still haven't turned it off. Daniel comes down from Tulsa once a month. We're better than we were. I think almost dying changes the shape of a relationship, and almost dying changed the shape of ours. He doesn't ask me to move anymore. I don't pretend I'm younger than I am. We meet in the middle, which is where we probably should have been meeting all along. Walter had a stroke in February. He's all right. His daughter moved back from Seattle, and she takes care of him now, and he can still talk, though his left hand doesn't work the way it used to. I go see him every Thursday. I bring him a cookie from the bakery on 12th Street because he likes them, and because I can't bring myself to buy a tin of Royal Dansk even now. I think he understands. Sometimes, sitting with him in his kitchen in Oklahoma City, I wonder about the math of what happened. A storm came. A house fell. A stranger sat down in a hallway. A wife who died in 2021 reached through her husband's hands 50 years after her own father's hands had reached through her, and built a house for a woman she never met. I don't know what to call that. I don't think it's a miracle, because I don't believe in miracles the way I used to. But I don't think it's coincidence either. I think it's something we don't have a word for yet. Something closer to inheritance. Something closer to the way a tin of butter cookies becomes a heart over 52 years, because two people kept deciding over and over to put their love inside it. I'm going to tell you the last thing, and then I'm going to stop. Last Thursday, at Walter's kitchen table, I opened the tin. I hadn't opened it in front of anyone in years, not even Daniel. I took out the note on top, not Harold's last one, I keep that one separate now, but the one that was on top from the rotation I do, where I read a different one every Sunday so they all get read eventually. This one said, "Ellie, I was wrong about the sycamore. It's a good tree. Don't ever let me cut it down. H. 1991. I read it to Walter. He smiled, slow, because one side of his face doesn't smile as fast as the other anymore. He said, he was right about that. I said, he usually was. And that was it. That was the whole thing. An old woman and an old man in a kitchen in Oklahoma City reading a 34-year-old note from a dead man about a tree that is still standing in front of a house that was torn down and rebuilt by the husband of a woman who once lost her own house in a tornado in 1952. I don't know what the lesson is. I'm not sure there is one. I've been told over the course of my life that stories are supposed to have lessons, but I think some stories are just supposed to be told, and the telling is the thing. So I've told you this one. I've told it the best I can. The tin is on the shelf in the hallway. The porch light is on. The sycamore is dropping seed balls again, because it's September, and I hate those seed balls, and I love that tree, and both of those things are true, and they have always been true, and maybe that's as close to a lesson as I'm going to get. If you ask me what I lost in the storm, I'd have to think about it. The house, of course, my books, Harold's tools in the garage, the quilt, the ring, 1,000 small things I'll keep remembering for the rest of my life, one at a time, the way you remember the dead. Not all at once, but in pieces, when something reminds you. But what I kept, what I carried out of that crawl space, pressed against my chest hard enough to leave a bruise, is sitting on a shelf in my hallway right now. And what I was given by a stranger in a flannel shirt in a hospital hallway is the house around that shelf. And what I've learned, if I've learned anything, is that the world is sometimes more generous than it has any reason to be, and sometimes less, and you don't get to choose which day is which. You just get to choose what you carry, and who you sit next to, and whether you answer when the phone rings. The porch light is on. I should go. Walter is expecting me on Thursday, and I have notes to reread before Sunday, and the sycamore needs raking, and there are still a great many ordinary mornings to get through. I hope you have a tin of your own. I hope somebody is filling it. Good night.